He buys a ranch for $5, then finds two Apache girls hanged inside. Daniel had never imagined that a simple newspaper ad could change his life. The tiny announcement in the local paper caught his eye one chilly morning while he sipped his coffee.
Ranch for sale, $5. At first, he thought it was a joke. Who could possibly sell an entire ranch for $5?
But as he read on, he realized it was real. The property had been abandoned for decades, and the owners had passed away long ago.
The land, overgrown and neglected, had simply fallen out of use. No one wanted it, so it was being sold for almost nothing.
For Daniel, who had been struggling financially for years, it seemed like a miracle. He had grown tired of the city's noise, its endless traffic, and the feeling that life had passed him by.
The idea of owning a ranch, even a small, broken-down one, filled him with excitement. He imagined himself rising with the sun, tending to the fields, maybe even raising animals.
The freedom, the fresh air, and the quiet life. It was everything he had been craving. Without thinking too much about the risks, Daniel decided to buy it. The paperwork was simple, and before he knew it, the ranch was his. Just like that. With $5 and a few signatures, a new chapter of his life was about to begin. When Daniel first arrived at the property, he was stunned. The ranch was even more deserted than he had imagined. Tall grasses swayed in the wind, hiding what once might have been neat rows of crops. Fences were broken, and the gate creaked ominously as he pushed it open. The house stood in the middle of the land, its paint peeling and windows dusty with years of neglect. A feeling of loneliness settled over him.
It was quiet, almost too quiet, and the silence made every step feel heavier. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves like soft murmurs, as if the land itself were trying to tell him something.
Despite the eerie atmosphere, Daniel was determined to explore. He had brought a backpack with essentials, a flashlight, some snacks, and a notebook to document the property. The first few rooms were empty except for broken furniture and dust. The floors creaked under his weight, and cobwebs clung to the corners like tiny reminders of time passing. As he moved from room to room, he could imagine the life that once filled this space. Laughter echoing in the halls, the smell of home-cooked meals, the sound of footsteps on the wooden floors. It was like stepping into a time capsule of someone else's life, frozen and forgotten. Daniel decided to check the back of the house, where he noticed a small, partially locked door. Something about it drew his curiosity. He pried it open with the flashlight, the hinges protesting loudly, and stepped inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the dim light, he could barely make out shapes hanging from the ceiling. At first, he thought it was some kind of decoration, maybe old clothes or a forgotten storage method. But as he looked closer, he realized the shapes were human. Two young girls, their small figures suspended in the air, and their faces pale and still. Shock froze him in place, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the broken floorboards. Heart pounding, Daniel fumbled for his phone and called the local authorities. His hand shook as he spoke, trying to explain what he had found. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but serious, telling him to stay back and wait for help. Daniel stepped outside, pacing nervously on the porch, unable to tear his eyes away from the doorway. The wind had picked up, whistling through the broken windows, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Every sound seemed amplified. The creak of the old porch, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of leaves. It was as if the ranch itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. While waiting, Daniel's mind wandered. Who were these girls?
How long had they been here? Why had no one discovered them before?
He felt a mixture of fear, sadness, and a strange sense of responsibility. He had stumbled into a story much larger than himself, a story that had been hidden for decades. Memories of news stories about missing children flashed through his mind, and he wondered if this was connected. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, living an ordinary life, but now he felt like a character in a dark, real-life mystery. When the authorities arrived, they moved quickly and professionally. Officers examined the scene, taking photographs and notes, while other staff began securing the area. Daniel watched quietly, feeling both relieved and anxious. Relief because he was no longer alone in facing the horror, and anxiety because the reality of what had happened sank deeper into his heart. He knew life would never feel normal again. He had bought a ranch for $5, expecting freedom and adventure, and instead, he had uncovered a tragic piece of history. As the day wore on, more people arrived, detectives, journalists, and neighbors curious about the commotion. Rumors spread quickly, and Daniel felt a strange mixture of pride and guilt.
Pride that he had been the one to find the truth, and guilt for stepping into a place so full of sorrow. The local community, many of whom had lived in the area for generations, shared stories about the ranch.
Some remembered the girl's family, while others had only heard whispers of tragedy long forgotten. Pieces of the past began to emerge, but the full story remained a mystery. That night, Daniel stayed in a small cabin near the ranch, unable to sleep. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the scent of the old land and the weight of history. He kept thinking about the girls, their lives cut short, and the decades of silence that followed. He realized that the ranch, once abandoned and forgotten, had now become a place of remembrance. He felt a strange connection to it, as if it had chosen him to uncover its secrets. His decision to buy the ranch for $5 had set off a chain of events he could never have predicted, leading him into a story of sorrow, history, and the responsibility of memory. By morning, Daniel was exhausted, but determined. He knew he had to face the reality of the ranch and the story it held. He took notes, wrote down his observations, and prepared himself for the investigation that was about to begin. Despite the fear and the sadness, there was also a sense of purpose. He had discovered something hidden, and now he had a role to play in bringing it to light. The ranch, silent and lonely, waited patiently, holding its secrets close, as Daniel stepped forward to uncover the truth. The morning after the shocking discovery, Daniel returned to the ranch, determination mixed with a heavy weight in his chest. The sun rose slowly, casting a golden light over the overgrown fields, but it did little to warm the chill in his mind. He felt as if the land itself was watching him, waiting for him to uncover more of its secrets. Though he had called the authorities the day before, he knew that understanding what had happened inside that abandoned house would take time, patience, and careful investigation. By mid-morning, the police had set up barriers around the house, and several detectives walked slowly through the rooms, examining every detail. Daniel stayed nearby, taking notes and asking questions when appropriate, but mostly he watched. He noticed how meticulous they were, photographing the walls, the floor, and even the broken furniture. Each step seemed careful, as though they were afraid that even the smallest movement might erase a clue. Daniel realized that this was more than a crime scene. It was a piece of history that had been hidden for far too long. Curiosity and anxiety tugged at him simultaneously. He wanted answers, but he also feared them.
Who were these girls? And why had no one known their story? He decided to speak with neighbors, hoping to uncover memories that might shed light on the mystery.
Walking through the dusty streets of the nearby town, he approached an elderly woman named Mrs. Hawkins, who had lived there for more than 60 years. Her hands shook slightly as she poured tea, and her eyes were cautious, as if she were weighing how much to share. They were children from the Apache family, she said slowly, her voice trembling.
I don't remember their names exactly, but I remember them. The family?
They were good people, but something terrible happened a long time ago. People whispered about it, but no one spoke too loudly. It was a secret that hung over this place for decades. Daniel listened intently, feeling the weight of her words. The ranch, which he had purchased with excitement, was not just an abandoned property. It was a silent witness to a long-forgotten tragedy. He thanked her and continued speaking to others, gathering fragments of memories. Each story added another layer to the mystery, but nothing provided a complete picture. The puzzle was still incomplete, and Daniel felt a growing sense of responsibility to help piece it together. Later that day, the local historian, Mr. Paveavinos
Whitman, visited the ranch. He was a tall man with a thoughtful expression, carrying a worn leather notebook.
He had studied the history of the town for decades and seemed almost as eager as Daniel to uncover the truth. Together, they walked through the overgrown fields, noting the locations of old buildings, fences, and even a small creek where children might have played long ago. "Places like this often carry stories that people don't want to remember," Mr. Whitman said quietly.
The ranch itself is a record of the past. Each broken window, each rusted tool, every empty room, they all tell part of the story.
But it takes patience to listen carefully. Sometimes, the smallest detail can reveal the most. Encouraged by his words, Daniel returned to the house to examine the rooms once more. With a flashlight and notebook in hand, he carefully inspected the walls, floors, and ceilings. He noticed faint markings, letters carved into the wood, perhaps left by someone long ago. Some seemed like simple initials, while others appeared to be part of a message, a story hidden in plain sight. He photographed everything, making sure to preserve the evidence before the authorities arrived to conduct their official investigation. As the day stretched on, Daniel began to feel the weight of the ranch's silence. The rooms seemed to whisper around him, echoing stories of a time he could barely imagine. He thought about the girls, imagining them playing in the sun, laughing and running through the fields. The contrast between that image and the discovery he had made was overwhelming. The ranch had held their story in secret for decades, and now it was his task to help tell it. That evening, the police brought in forensic experts and investigators from the county archives. They began searching for records, old photographs, and documents that might identify the girls and their family. Daniel watched as stacks of yellowed papers were spread across a table, maps and letters revealing the town's forgotten past. Each discovery brought a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because answers were slowly emerging. Sadness because the truth was painful. The ranch had witnessed sorrow, neglect, and forgotten lives, and those realities weighed heavily on everyone involved. Meanwhile, journalists had started to arrive, curious about the strange story of a ranch bought for $5 and the discovery within. Daniel was careful with his words, speaking only of what he had seen and what he hoped to learn. He wanted the story to be treated with respect, not sensationalized. He knew the tragedy of the girls could easily be exploited for headlines, and he felt protective of their memory. The attention, while uncomfortable, also brought more resources to the investigation. More experts arrived, and slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. One day, while searching through old records in the town archives, Daniel stumbled upon a map with handwritten notes. It marked the ranch and included the names of families who had lived there over the years. Among them were the names of the Apache family he had heard about from Mrs. Five. Hawkins. His heart raced as he realized he was getting closer to understanding the girl's story. Each name, each date, brought him deeper into the history of the land. The ranch was no longer just a place of mystery. It was a portal to the past, holding secrets that demanded attention. Daniel also reached out to the local Apache community, hoping to connect with the descendants who might remember the family. A woman named Clara agreed to meet him at a nearby community center. Her eyes were sad but kind, and she spoke with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "Our history has often been ignored or erased," she said. "But stories like this matter. They remind us of what we've endured and the children we've lost. Thank you for wanting to know the truth." Through Clara, Daniel learned more about the girls and their family. They had been kind, hardworking, and loved by their community. Yet the world around them had not always been kind in return. Their disappearance had been hushed, their story forgotten by most, and the ranch had remained silent, keeping their memory hidden. Daniel felt a mixture of sorrow and determination. He had stumbled into a story much bigger than himself, a story that demanded care, respect, and attention. As the weeks passed, the investigation continued. Daniel spent his days at the ranch, documenting findings, speaking with authorities, and piecing together the history of the property. He began to notice patterns in the land, the way the sun fell across the fields, the old paths the girls might have taken, even small objects hidden under the floorboards. Every detail seemed significant. Each day brought him closer to understanding the lives that had once filled the empty rooms, and the responsibility he now carried grew heavier. By the time the first month passed, Daniel had formed a routine. Mornings were spent exploring the property, afternoons at the archives or speaking with the community, and evenings writing notes and reflecting. The ranch had transformed in his mind from a simple piece of land bought for $5 into a living story full of history, sorrow, and hidden beauty. He began to understand that uncovering the truth was not just about solving a mystery. It was about honoring the memory of the girls and the family they had belonged to. One quiet evening, Daniel sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The fields glowed in soft orange light, and the wind whispered gently through the trees.
What had started as a chance opportunity, a simple purchase of abandoned land, had become a journey into history, empathy, and responsibility.
The ranch was no longer just his property. It was a place of remembrance, a link between the past and the present. In that moment, Daniel realized something important. The story of the girls was not only his to uncover, it was a story for the community, for the town, and for future generations.
The ranch, which had once been silent and abandoned, now had a voice through him.
And though the truth was painful, it was also a chance to bring light to a long-forgotten history, to honor lives that had been hidden for far too long. Daniel leaned back, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. The ranch around him was still quiet, still full of secrets, but for the first time he felt a sense of hope. The investigation was far from over, but he knew that by facing the past, he could help shape a future where the memory of the girls would not be forgotten. And in that quiet, golden moment, Daniel felt that he had found more than just land for $5. He had found a purpose. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel found himself spending more and more time at the ranch and in the town archives.
Every document he uncovered, every old photograph or faded letter, seemed to whisper secrets of a past long forgotten. He had expected to find simple clues, perhaps some names or dates, but what he discovered was far more complex.
The ranch had a story of life, loss, and silence that stretched back decades. Each piece he uncovered was like a puzzle piece falling into place, yet at the same time, it deepened the mystery. One afternoon, while sifting through a box of old newspapers in the archives, Daniel found a yellowed clipping that made him pause. The headline was faint but legible. 2 Apache children disappear from ranch. The date was nearly 50 years ago. He felt a chill run down his spine. The article was short and vague, mentioning that the children had been last seen playing near the edge of the ranch and that local authorities had launched an investigation. It went on to say that the case had gone cold, and after a few weeks the children were presumed lost to history. The words felt heavy in Daniel's hands, as if the paper itself were mourning the forgotten lives. Determined to learn more, Daniel sought out more records, including census data and property documents. He discovered that the ranch had belonged to a wealthy family long ago, who had purchased the land from the government. After several ownership changes, the property eventually fell into disuse. Most strikingly, he found a small handwritten diary belonging to one of the ranch's previous caretakers. The diary spoke of a family who lived nearby, a family of Apache descent, who had always been kind, hardworking, and deeply connected to the land. Reading the diary, Daniel felt a connection to the past he had not anticipated. The caretaker described the children as lively and cheerful, full of curiosity and laughter. There were entries about them playing near the creek, helping their parents with small chores, and exploring the ranch with wide-eyed wonder. But the tone shifted toward fear and sorrow in later entries. There were mentions of local prejudice, whispers of hostility from some neighbors, and a growing unease about the safety of the children. The caretaker had written that something terrible might happen if the family was ignored or mistreated. These words struck Daniel deeply. He realized that the tragedy he had discovered was not just a random event, but part of a larger context of neglect and misunderstanding. The girls had lived in a time and place where their family's culture was not always respected, and their disappearance had been quietly overlooked. Daniel felt a profound sadness, not just for the girls, but for the generations who had endured similar struggles and been forgotten. He wanted more than anything to bring their story into the light, to give meaning to the memory that had been lost for so long. In the following days, Daniel returned to the ranch with renewed purpose. He walked through the fields, imagining the children running along the old paths, their laughter echoing through the tall grasses. He noted the positions of old structures, the remains of a barn, and even a small orchard that had once thrived. Every detail felt significant, as if the land itself were trying to speak. With his notebook in hand, he sketched maps and marked areas where he might find further clues. His exploration became a careful balance between detective work and historical research, as he tried to uncover both the physical and emotional truths of the ranch. One afternoon, a historian named Mrs. Delgado joined him at the ranch. She specialized in Native American history and had agreed to help Daniel interpret the records and artifacts he had found. Together, they examined old photographs of the ranch, letters, and family documents.
Mrs. Delgado explained the significance of certain symbols and practices in the Apache culture, helping Daniel understand the family's traditions and values.
These children were part of a vibrant culture, she said. Their lives were meaningful, and their story deserves respect.
The land remembers them, and now it's our responsibility to remember too.
Her words resonated deeply with Daniel.
He began to see the ranch not as a haunted, abandoned place, but as a living memory of those who had once called it home. He felt a growing sense of duty, not just to document the facts, but to honor the lives of the children and their family.
Each visit to the town archives, each conversation with descendants or historians brought him closer to understanding the full picture. The girl's story was slowly emerging from the shadows, and Daniel was determined to ensure it would not be forgotten again.
As he pieced together the past, Daniel also began to notice patterns in the land itself. Certain trees, rocks, and even small depressions in the soil seemed to align with the descriptions in the old diary. He realized that the ranch was more than just property. It was a map of memories. The land had witnessed joy, sorrow, and resilience, and now it held the key to telling the full story.
With each new discovery, Daniel felt both awe and responsibility. He knew that understanding the past required patience, empathy, and careful attention to detail. One day, while searching the attic of the old house, Daniel found a small wooden chest tucked in a corner. Inside were photographs, letters, and small personal items belonging to the girls and their family. The photographs showed the children smiling, holding hands, and playing in the fields. The letters were written in careful, loving handwriting, describing everyday life, celebrations, and hopes for the future. As Daniel examined these artifacts, he felt a deep connection to the past. These were not just historical documents. They were pieces of human lives, vibrant and full of emotion. Through the letters, Daniel learned more about the girls' personalities, their dreams, and the challenges their family faced. He read about the mother's tireless work to provide for her children, the father's dedication to protecting his family and preserving their traditions, and the small joys that had made their lives meaningful. Each page deepened Daniel's understanding and compassion. The ranch, once a place of mystery and fear, now became a place of empathy, connection, and remembrance. At night, Daniel would sit by the fireplace in the small cabin near the ranch, reflecting on what he had learned. He wrote notes, organized photographs, and began drafting a timeline of the family's life at the ranch. He realized that the story was not only about loss, but also about resilience, love, and the enduring impact of memory. The girls, though gone, had left traces of their lives that could now be honored and shared. The investigation and historical research slowly gained attention from the local community. Some neighbors who had once avoided the ranch began visiting with curiosity and respect. They shared stories, old memories, and even artifacts from their own families that helped fill gaps in the history. Daniel was amazed by how much the town wanted to reconnect with its past and honor the lives that had been forgotten. The ranch had become a bridge between generations, connecting the present with a history that had almost been lost. As weeks turned into months, Daniel and Mrs. Pansal Delgado began to compile a comprehensive record of the girls' lives, the family's history, and the ranch's past. They included photographs, letters, maps, and diary entries, creating a narrative that was both factual and deeply human. Daniel felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment he had never experienced before. The ranch, which had initially seemed like a simple escape from city life, had become a mission, a way to preserve memory and honor lives that mattered.
One quiet morning, Daniel stood at the edge of the orchard, watching the sun rise over the fields. The light illuminated the tall grasses and the remains of old fences, casting long shadows across the land. He thought about the girls, imagining them running through the orchard, laughing and carefree. He felt a profound connection to the past, a sense that the land itself was alive with memories waiting to be shared. The ranch was no longer just a property, it was a living story, a testament to resilience, love, and the importance of remembering. In that moment, Daniel understood something vital. Uncovering the past was not simply about discovering facts or solving a mystery. It was about empathy, respect, and connection. The girl's story, once hidden and ignored, had the power to teach, inspire, and remind people of the value of every life. The ranch had chosen him to uncover the story, and he had embraced the responsibility wholeheartedly. With renewed determination, Daniel continued his work. He organized the documents, prepared presentations for the local community, and spoke with descendants who had longed to reconnect with their family's history. Each conversation, each piece of evidence, strengthened his resolve to honor the girls and their family. The ranch, which had once been silent and abandoned, was now a place of remembrance, learning, and connection. A place where the past could finally speak. By the time Part 3 reached its conclusion, Daniel had transformed the ranch from a site of mystery into a living memorial of the past. He had uncovered the stories of the girls, understood the challenges their family faced, and begun to share their lives with the world. The ranch, once forgotten, now carried a new purpose. And as Daniel walked through the fields, the wind whispering through the trees, he felt the presence of the children, their memory alive in the land, guiding him forward. Days passed, and Daniel began to feel the emotional weight of the ranch more heavily than ever. The discovery of the two young Apache girls and the stories of their family, long hidden and forgotten, had filled his mind and heart. What had started as a simple purchase of abandoned land for $5 had transformed into a mission of remembrance, research, and responsibility. But with this mission came a strain he had not expected. The ranch was no longer just a property. It was a living reminder of lives interrupted in the silence that had followed.
Daniel found that he struggled with sleep.
At night, he would lie in the small cabin near the ranch, staring at the ceiling as memories of the girls, their laughter, and the fragments of their lives he had uncovered filled his thoughts. Sometimes he could almost hear the sound of children playing in the orchard, the rush of the wind through the tall grasses, or the creak of the old porch where he had first discovered the tragedy. These sounds haunted him, both comforting and unsettling, a reminder that the past had not truly left the land. Neighbors and community members began to notice his frequent visits to the ranch, and reactions were mixed. Some were curious and supportive, bringing him old photographs or family stories. Others were wary, suggesting that perhaps the past should remain buried. "It's not a place to dwell on old sorrows," one neighbor said cautiously. "It's abandoned for a reason." Daniel understood their point of view, but he could not ignore what he had discovered. The girl's story deserved attention, respect, and remembrance. He felt a responsibility that went beyond himself. It was a moral and human duty to ensure their memory lived on. One afternoon, Daniel met with Clara, a member of the local Apache community who had been helping him connect with the descendants of the family. She brought with her old letters, photographs, and small heirlooms passed down through generations. Sitting on the porch of the cabin, Daniel carefully examined each item. Clara explained the significance of each artifact, from the embroidered patterns on clothing to small charms that had been given to the children for protection. "These items tell a story," she said softly.
They speak of love, hope, and life. They remind us that even in tragedy there was joy and care.
Daniel felt a deep respect and humility as he listened. He realized that this work was not just about history. It was about people, emotions, and legacy. The ranch had become a bridge between the past and the present, allowing him to connect with lives he had never known but felt deeply. Every photograph, letter, and memory he preserved was a step toward ensuring that the children's lives were not forgotten. At the same time, the emotional toll weighed heavily on him. Some days he felt overwhelmed by sadness and helplessness. He wondered if he was doing enough, or if his efforts would make any difference at all. The ranch itself seemed to hold its sorrow in the empty rooms, broken furniture, and silent halls. Daniel spent hours walking the property, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking aloud to the girls, as if acknowledging their lives could somehow honor them. "I will not let you be forgotten," he whispered one evening, standing under the fading light of the sun. To cope with the burden, Daniel began keeping a daily journal. He wrote not only about his discoveries, but also about his thoughts, emotions, and reflections. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to process the sorrow, fear, and responsibility he felt. He documented everything meticulously: the artifacts, letters, conversations with historians, and even his own feelings of doubt.
Over time, the journal became a record not only of the investigation but also of his own journey, showing how deeply he had been transformed by the story of the girls and the ranch. The process of preserving the past was also filled with small moments of joy. Daniel discovered the playful nature of the children in photographs, the bright smiles in old portraits, and the care shown in letters from their family. He imagined them running through the orchard, playing near the creek, and discovering the world with curiosity and excitement.
These glimpses of happiness made the emotional burden more bearable. They reminded him that life, even when cut short, was full of meaning, and that the girls' memories deserved to be celebrated as well as mourned. In addition to working on the historical record, Daniel began to engage with the local community in a more active way. He organized small meetings where townspeople could share stories, memories, and artifacts related to the ranch and the family. Some neighbors were hesitant at first, but gradually they began to participate. Elderly residents shared recollections of the family, while younger generations brought photographs and heirlooms they had found at home. The ranch, once silent and isolated, was slowly becoming a center of connection, memory, and dialogue. Through this work, Daniel also faced internal struggles. He often questioned whether he was truly qualified to handle the story of the children. He was not a historian by training, nor a professional researcher. He was an ordinary man who had stumbled into an extraordinary situation. Yet with each piece of evidence he uncovered, each conversation he had with descendants, and each artifact he preserved, he realized that what mattered most was respect, care, and empathy. Knowledge and expertise were important, but heart and dedication were equally vital. One evening, after a long day at the ranch, Daniel sat quietly under the stars. The wind whispered through the trees and the fields glowed in soft moonlight. He reflected on the journey so far, the challenges and the small triumphs. He thought about the girls, imagining their laughter and curiosity. He realized that his work had transformed him as much as it had transformed the ranch. He had grown more patient, more compassionate, and more aware of the importance of memory and history. The ranch had taught him lessons he could not have anticipated. As the weeks passed, Daniel began to make plans for preserving the ranch and the story of the girls in a more permanent way. He considered creating a small memorial, a space where descendants, historians, and the public could honor the children and learn about the family's history. He wanted the ranch to be a place of respect and remembrance, rather than just an abandoned property. This work gave him a sense of purpose that extended far beyond personal curiosity or financial gain. The ranch had become a responsibility he embraced fully, even as it weighed heavily on his heart. At the same time, Daniel faced practical challenges. The ranch was in disrepair, with broken fences, unstable floors, and overgrown fields. He worked to make the property safe, clearing paths, repairing small structures, and ensuring that visitors could safely explore. Each repair felt symbolic, a way to restore the land, honor the children, and make the past tangible for those who came to learn. It was hard work, physically demanding and often frustrating, but Daniel found satisfaction in seeing progress. The ranch, like the story he was uncovering, was slowly coming back to life. One day, while cleaning an old storage shed, Daniel found a collection of handmade toys. They were simple, dolls, carved animals, and small trinkets, but they were clearly cherished items. He realized these were the toys the girls had played with, items filled with love and imagination. Holding them in his hands, Daniel felt a mixture of sorrow and warmth. He carefully documented each item, photographing it and noting its condition. These small objects, though humble, were powerful reminders of the children's lives and the joy they had once known. As Daniel continued his work,
He also began sharing the story with schools and local organizations.
He spoke about the importance of memory, respect, and preserving history. He emphasized that the story of the ranch and the children was not just about tragedy, it was about resilience, culture, and the lives that mattered. Children in the community learned about the history of the land, the family, and the Apache culture, gaining lessons in empathy and respect. The ranch became a living classroom, teaching values that extended far beyond its boundaries. Through it all, Daniel's personal growth was undeniable. He had arrived at the ranch seeking a quiet, simple life, but he had found something far more meaningful. He had discovered the power of memory, the importance of connection, and the responsibility of honoring lives that might otherwise have been forgotten. The ranch had challenged him, burdened him, and shaped him in ways he could never have imagined. And yet, for all the sorrow and struggle, he felt a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment. In quiet moments, Daniel would walk through the fields and sit beneath the trees, imagining the girls playing nearby. He spoke to them softly, promising to tell their story, to preserve their memory, and to honor their family. The wind would carry his words through the orchard, and he imagined the land itself listening. The ranch, once silent and abandoned, now seemed alive with history, memory, and the promise of remembrance. By the end of Part 4, Daniel had fully embraced the emotional and practical challenges of preserving the past. He had faced doubt, sadness, and fear, but he had also found joy, purpose, and connection. The ranch was no longer just a property. It was a living testament to the lives of the girls, their family, and the community that had once surrounded them. And Daniel, once an ordinary man seeking escape, had become a guardian of memory, a bridge between past and present, and a voice for those who had been long forgotten. The months of investigation, research, and reflection had changed Daniel in ways he could never have imagined. What had begun as a simple purchase of a rundown ranch for $5 had grown into a mission to honor the memory of two young Apache girls and their family, whose story had been forgotten for decades. The discovery had weighed heavily on him, but it had also given his life purpose, connecting him to a history that was both sorrowful and inspiring. By now, Daniel had gathered a vast collection of photographs, letters, diary entries, and artifacts. He had mapped the ranch meticulously, noting where the girls had played, where the old house had stood, and where family life had once thrived. He had spoken to local historians, community elders, and descendants of the Apache family. Each conversation, each discovery added depth and clarity to the story. He had learned not only about the tragedy that had occurred, but also about the lives, joys, and culture that had filled the ranch long before it became abandoned. Daniel knew that preserving this history required more than notes and photographs. He wanted the ranch itself to become a place of remembrance, where people could learn about the children and their family while reflecting on the lessons of the past. He envisioned a small memorial, carefully designed to honor the girls, celebrate their lives, and educate visitors about the history of the Apache people in the region. It would be a space of respect, not sorrow, a place of reflection, not fear. He began by clearing paths through the overgrown fields, making it possible for visitors to walk safely and explore the land as it might have been decades ago. Broken fences were repaired, and the remnants of the old house were stabilized, preserving them as historical markers rather than trying to restore them fully. Every repair, every improvement was done thoughtfully, with the input of historians and members of the Apache community. Daniel wanted to ensure that the ranch told the story truthfully, without erasing its history or sanitizing its past. One morning, he held a meeting with community leaders, historians, and descendants of the Apache family. They discussed how the ranch could best serve as a memorial and educational site. Ideas flowed freely. Interpretive signs explaining the family's history, small exhibitions of artifacts, and guided tours that could teach visitors about life at the ranch long ago. Daniel listened carefully to every suggestion, taking notes and asking questions. He wanted the site to feel authentic, respectful, and meaningful. Clara, who had guided him in understanding the Apache culture, emphasized the importance of storytelling. "This isn't just about history," she said. "It's about lives." The children had dreams, laughter, and love. The ranch is their voice now. "We must let it speak." Her words stayed with Daniel. He realized that the memorial would not just honor the girls, it would honor every family and every child whose life had been overlooked or forgotten. It was about giving dignity and remembrance where it had long been denied.
As construction and preparation began, Daniel also focused on sharing the story more widely. He organized presentations at schools, community centers, and local libraries, explaining the history of the ranch, the family, and the girls.
He spoke about the importance of empathy, respect, and memory. Children learned about the girls' daily lives, the games they played, the chores they helped with, and the culture that shaped their family. Adults reflected on how communities could remember and honor those who came before them. Daniel saw firsthand how a tragic story could become a lesson in compassion and understanding. Throughout this process, Daniel continued to visit the ranch daily. He walked the fields, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking softly to the girls as he imagined them playing among the trees and orchards. Each artifact, photograph, and letter reminded him of their lives, their joys, and the family that loved them. The work was emotionally heavy, but it was also deeply fulfilling.
He had become not just a caretaker of the land, but a guardian of memory. One afternoon, as he was placing interpretive signs along the paths, he noticed a group of school children approaching. Their teacher had brought them for an educational tour. The children listened intently as Daniel explained the history of the ranch, the family, and the girls. He showed them photographs, small heirlooms, and parts of the house that had been preserved. He emphasized that while the story had a tragic beginning, it was also a story of life, culture, and the importance of remembering. The children asked questions, their curiosity bright and respectful, and Daniel realized that the legacy of the girls was being passed to a new generation. As the memorial project neared completion, Daniel invited local descendants of the Apache family to visit. They walked through the ranch together, sharing stories, laughter, and memories that had been preserved through generations. Some pointed out landmarks they remembered from their childhood. Others shared family traditions and customs. Daniel felt a profound sense of connection and gratitude. The ranch, once silent and abandoned, had become a place of life, learning, and remembrance.
Even as he worked, Daniel reflected on how the experience had changed him. He had arrived at the ranch seeking simplicity, a quiet escape from the city, and instead had found a mission that reshaped his understanding of history, empathy, and human connection.
He had learned to listen to the land, to honor the voices of those who could no longer speak for themselves, and to recognize that even forgotten stories have value. The ranch had become more than a property. It had become a teacher, a bridge between past and present, and a symbol of resilience and remembrance. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Daniel walked to the small orchard where he imagined the girls playing. He knelt among the trees and placed a few wildflowers he had picked along the paths. He whispered a promise: "Your story will live on. You will not be forgotten. This land remembers you, and now so will everyone who visits."
The wind rustled through the leaves as if carrying his words across the fields, and for a moment Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. The memorial officially opened on a bright spring morning. Families, historians, community members, and descendants of the Apache family gathered to honor the girls. Daniel gave a brief speech emphasizing the importance of memory, empathy, and connection. He spoke about the journey of discovery, the history of the ranch, and the lives of the children who had once filled it with joy. The crowd listened in respectful silence, some moved to tears, others nodding in quiet understanding. The ranch, which had once been a place of isolation and sorrow, now stood as a living testament to remembrance and resilience. Visitors walked the paths, read the interpretive signs, and viewed photographs and artifacts carefully preserved in small displays. Children learned about the games the girls had played, the traditions of their family, and the care and love that had shaped their lives. Adults reflected on the lessons of history, community, and responsibility. Daniel watched quietly, feeling a mix of pride, relief, and humility. The story that had been hidden for decades was finally being told, honored, and shared. Over time, the ranch became a place of learning, reflection, and connection. Local schools organized trips, historians documented its history, and descendants visited regularly to maintain the memory of their family. Daniel continued to live nearby, caring for the property, guiding visitors, and ensuring that the legacy of the girls remained vibrant and respected. The ranch, once abandoned and silent, had transformed into a place of life, empathy, and enduring memory. Daniel often reflected on how a simple act, a $5 purchase, had led him into a journey far beyond anything he could have imagined. The ranch had challenged him, burdened him, and changed him, but it had also given him a sense of purpose, connection, and fulfillment. He realized that stories, even those buried for decades, have the power to teach, inspire, and heal. By honoring the girls, he had learned lessons about history, empathy, and the human capacity to remember and care. As the sun set each evening over the fields, Daniel would walk through the orchard, remembering the children's laughter, the love of their family, and the lives that had shaped the land. He knew that the memorial would continue to teach, inspire, and honor for generations to come. The ranch, once purchased for $5, had become priceless, a place where the past and present met, where memory was preserved, and where the lives of two young girls could finally be remembered with dignity, respect, and love. In the end, Daniel understood that his journey had been about more than the ranch itself. It had been about connection, compassion, and responsibility.
It had been about seeing value in every life, even those long forgotten. And as he stood among the fields, the wind brushing gently through the trees, he knew that the girl's story would live on, not as a tale of sorrow, but as a story of remembrance, honor, and enduring life.